All right, welcome to the serverless panel for July. We have a great lineup today. We're going to be talking about architected serverless applications and architectures and serverless education. Today, the three topics are going to be what well-architected means in a serverless context. So we'll dive into that. Best practices for the well-architected framework that AWS provides to us, as well as serverless education and how to jumpstart your career. So I'm happy to see a lot of familiar faces, obviously, with Rosius, as well as Benoît and Paul, but also Kristi. Again, I interviewed Kristi on the Talking Serverless podcast very recently, and it's awesome to have you back with us again. So with that, let's do a round robin of intros. Kick it off with Paul first, and then each one of y'all can give a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump into the first topic.
Hey, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, whenever you were listening to this. My name is Paul Chin Jr. I'm a serverless developer for Serverless Guru, and really stoked to be on the show today. Well Architected is a very interesting operational framework for making things just, making them nicer in AWS. So looking forward to it. And then I'll just kick it off to Ro then.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. My name is Rosius Ndimofor. I'm a serverless developer at Serverless Guru and an AWS serverless hero. And I'm really happy to be here. So I'll pass it up to Benoît.
Yeah, welcome everyone. My name is Benoît. I'm a AWS community builder since last year. Also working at Serverless Guru as a full-time serverless developer, doing great stuff with serverless technology. Really happy to be here and enjoying this moment with you guys. Next to you, Kristi.
Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here today. My name is Kristi. I am a principal software engineer at Liberty Mutual Insurance. I specifically work on our serverless team where we help to enable serverless developers. We have about 5,000 tech employees, 3,000 engineers that we're working to kind of embrace a serverless first initiative and move to the cloud as effectively and cost efficiently as possible. And I am also the most recent AWS serverless hero.
Yeah, that's fantastic. My name is Ryan Jones. I'm going to be the DJ kicking it off this month, similar to most months, but the bulk of the content and creative insight is going to come from our panel, of course. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the first topic. What does well-architected actually mean in a serverless context? We've heard it for a long time. Originally, the well-architected framework was not made with like a serverless lens, and they kind of adapted it for that purpose. I personally went through a lot of stuff this morning around the well-architected framework with the serverless lens, and I've seen how robust it can be. So I would love to get y'all's opinion on what does it mean in a serverless context and with your own personal insight, of course. And to kick that off, let's go ahead and jump to Benoît.
All right, yeah, well, can you remind me first the 6 pillars of the well-architected framework? So the first one was operational excellence, it was security, reliability, performance efficiency, cost optimization, and the recently introduced one, sustainability. So I don't know, maybe we could start with operational excellence. So I think in a serverless focus in serverless lens, we could do things like keep track of everything that runs in serverless. Since in service everything's to be distributed, you need to know how everything works, how everything performs at every moment. So you are responsible for keeping maybe metrics and logs and alerts, maybe different kinds of metrics, like maybe business metrics, like you have some goals that you would like to achieve, maybe how many, if you have any commerce, how many orders you place, how many items you sold, etc. But also system metrics, maybe. So how are your Lambda performing? How long do they take to run? All these kind of metrics, right? Yeah, no, I'd like to hear what you guys think.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, let's jump to Kristi. Kristi, I know that this is like very near and dear to your heart, so hopefully you can give us some insight here. What does it mean to be
Yeah.
well architected?
So well architected has actually been a huge focus of our team this year, and it's something we're really excited about. And we're kind of pushing a lot of our developers to doing well architected reviews, which, folks aren't familiar. It's questions related to each of those pillars that we just went through, specific to how your team works or how your applications are built. And well architected specifically just kind of helps with those cloud best practices and gives you some guardrails and some guidelines to build your project in a efficient, performant, cost-effective kind of way. I would say in terms of a serverless lens. So I actually just caught up to, I shared this a little bit, but the serverless lens was actually refreshed for the first time in about 3 years since it was released. Just a couple weeks ago. So there were some cool highlights that came out of that, and I just went through and refreshed myself through the white paper. And a lot of it is very similar to how you do a well-architected review for non-serverless applications as well. If you read through that, I think 80-page white paper, it'll give you a lot of references back to the main well-architected white paper and reviews. But there's a lot more detail around specific serverless projects and examples, like building a serverless mobile application or building a serverless REST application or microservices or a web app. So I really like that there's a larger focus on that. And I think that there is more detail around the serverless services like Lambda, API gateway, some step functions, and when to use certain versions of things. For example, like step functions, express versus standard. There's a whole list of exactly what you would want to use which one for. So I think that there's a lot of similarities, but the serverless lens, I would say, just goes into more detail into those serverless services.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think that's a really good note, because I think one thing that I definitely saw on the serverless application lens page is that it has a publication date that says July 14th. So I know that with most things in our field, when they're not refreshed for a while or it doesn't fit a use case, it ends up kind of being thrown to the side. So it's nice to see that it's been refreshed. And it's also nice to hear that, hopefully people, if you're listening for this and you've seen the serverless lens in the past and you're like, I don't know if this was fully up to date, it is now refreshed. And so, definitely give it a second look. And I know we've had a conversation about Amplify recently with Michael Liendo, and that was a similar type of thing where Amplify early days is not Amplify today. And, that's a good call out there. So I guess tossing it over to Paul, when you're thinking about well architected, there's a lot of different things that Benoît mentioned. There's the operation side, reliability, sustainability. What sort of things do you look at personally when you're building applications? And maybe what do you think is passed over, I guess? What should people look more at when building these applications?
Yeah, it's excuse me. It's really great that AWS has taken the time to really build out these white papers and build up this body of knowledge, and then have actually, committed to updating it, which is, amazing. And I think that for folks who are already starting to use AWS, the well-architected framework can help them get to an even higher level of performance and scalability. And I think that the area that most people right now are overlooking is the importance of the event-driven structure and how important events are to a serverless system. Developers who are super used to running stateful servers and running stateful processes and containers and stuff, they just haven't gotten used to the fact of turning over all of their sort of messaging to the AWS cloud services, the cloud native services, so that you're not having to write your own custom queues and custom buses and stuff like that. And really taking the time to put a focus and emphasis on that event-driven architecture. And they call it out here in the lens, specifically, because if you look at the number of scenarios that they have, really all of them can be put under event-driven. Even your basic like web applications Now you don't have to have a full server process running. You just expose your URL endpoints and let your application hit it. One of the things that I think was really cool, and I want to ask y'all, is if you were to add something to this, you know, what would it be? For me, I still think that the data layer still needs to be fleshed out more for serverless applications. You know, I think it's a huge, big chunk and opportunity to really figure out what is the best way to answer your persistence data layers, because what we're seeing is really in practice, we're using a combination of many databases, like including using S3 as a cache, including hitting Dynamo, also still using relational stuff, like all together. And it's possible because of the managed service aspect. You don't have to do everything all in one database like a monolith used to be. And so, you know, just kick it back to y'all. Like, is there anything in here that you think in the future could continue to be improved and expanded upon in an area?
Yeah, I can jump in there, Paul. You hit on like a lot of great points, and the data layer is interesting because one thing that I also thought of that was kind of missing from that was we talk a lot about single table design with DynamoDB, and I'm surprised that that's not called out as a best practice in there as well. I think one thing that is really missing for me is, and I've been talking about this a little bit, and it's understandable because it's still pretty new, but there is no direction on sustainability pillar right now. Actually, in that lens, there's just a little statement of like, oh, kind of coming soon, or, you know, we don't have any recommendations for this right now. So I'm really kind of excited to see how the sustainability pillar kind of evolves and makes its way through these white papers and things. One thing I do really like about them, though, is that in comparing them to like the AWS documentation is very cut and dry of like, here are the features. Whereas I feel like the white papers tell a little bit more of a story and help you with use cases and examples. And I think you hit on it, Paul, scenarios. So it's kind of more like, hey, if you're looking to do this, or this is your environment or application, and this is how it looks like, here are the key services you're going to need. And here is why you're going to pick an express versus a standard workflow, or using S3 or S3 select. So like there's a lot of different like trade-offs. It goes through a lot of that of like, well, maybe if you're more cost conscious, you'll want to use this service over this one. Or maybe if you're more performance conscious, like this is the trade-off to selecting these things. So I like that it tells a lot more of that story and kind of brings it together rather than just looking at cut and dry documentation and trying to figure out what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I would jump in there too is the probably the infrastructure as code aspect. Like as we know, when we're building Lambda functions, there's a lot that goes into how you organize your repos, multi-repo versus mono-repo, how you actually do packaging for Lambda, what frameworks you use, what those commands are. And I think that that's a very critical part of how we actually do stuff. And so I think this is like a great high level, hey, think about that, hey, think about this, and potentially like a starting path. But definitely need to deep dive into even the CloudWatch Insights part that's in this well-architected serverless lens. It brings it up, talks about what it does. But I know personally, my experience with running actual CloudWatch Insights is like not probably where it should be. And so it'd be nice if it kind of gave a more dedicated path that way too. Obviously, I don't know how big we end up making that document at that point. You know, that's always the problem, how you make things simple. And I wanted to transition something as well to hear Rose input here. Both Benoît and Ro, you know, not going to name any client names, of course, but y'all have been working on a project. It's in production. Huge amount of work that's went into it. Serverless architecture. Now y'all are dealing with the post-production sort of stuff. How does the serverless lens and like what things are you now looking at or thinking about that could be potentially insightful for our audience?
I think I'll jump on this one and I'll just give a little bit of insight. I think the first for the pillars, I think the first one would be operational excellence. You know, you try to get insights on what's actually happening in the app, because that's exactly how you can easily debug the application, because we have a logging set up, and you know, when an issue or when a bug occurs, it actually throws it actually throws a log, and we have to, go through that. We have to go through that, and then we try to analyze the problem based on that log, on the bug that was actually generated. So operational excellence here really plays a huge part, and then performance too, because at the same time, we receive a lot of, I don't know if I'm going too deep, but we receive a lot of throttling issues and stuff like that. So you now have to, look deeper again into your code and see what you didn't really, what you didn't actually program properly, and try to make optimizations in order for the code to run properly. So, well, based on that, based on the issues, the issues that I've seen, these two pillars really that are really important for analyzing the bugs and solving them. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll jump on this as well. Regarding that particular project, I think we kind of did a good job at maybe following the pillars as much as we could. Though there could be much more work we could do on this one. I mean, especially on costs. Last time I looked, we were running at around $30 per day for the whole workload, which is kind of good. I mean, for production, it's kind of with the low end. So we're very happy with that. Although maybe I can complain for AWS there, at least with the AWS AppSync team. At the very beginning of deploying production, we had the logs enabled on AppSync on production, and we all know that AppSync has generates a huge amount of logs. So if we wanted to follow maybe the best practices regarding keeping logs and keeping trace of what happens in a given service, that goes against the cost optimization, because it generated a huge bill for just CloudWatch. So that's here. Sometimes it's just hard to follow maybe a balance between all these pillars. So you have to give on one to just maybe take back on another one. And you have to find what is more important for you to follow for your goals.
Yeah, I love this, and I think it's a good segue into the idea of one of the things that gets mentioned inside of the serverless application lens is trade-offs. And trade-offs is so huge because obviously in an ideal world, we do all of it. It's all done. It's all like magically put together, and we have infinite amount of time, and our timelines are spread out, and our pressure from senior leadership and so on is not crunching us into building something more quickly than we would be that we would want to, of course. But in reality, we do have to make those trade-offs. Cost was mentioned there. And so I guess when y'all think about trade-offs, when you're building something, what is worth trading off initially? And then what is a hard requirement? You need this day one, no matter what, before anything ever gets out to customers. How do y'all think about that?
I can kick this one off because I'm working in insurance, so there's a lot of financial data. There's a lot of personal information. So obviously, first and foremost is security. I mean, that's the biggest concern, and something that we have to be very, very careful with. We have a lot of things that are locked down. I know you even mentioned Amplify earlier. That's not a service that we have even been listed to use. So we're pretty strict with some of those requirements, as we should be, just with all of the personal data that we're handling. So that is one thing that we will not trade off on. Performance, I'd say, is up there too, just because we are working with customers in situations that can be very stressful. If you just got in a car accident, you need to submit a claim, or you're starting up your insurance, you need to get a quote. So you were kind of dealing with customers and clients that are sometimes in crisis mode. So we have to deal with some of those things as trade-offs. So I'd say we try to optimize for cost, obviously, as much as we possibly can. Sometimes, though, we do take that as the trade-off for things like performance and reliability. depending on how business critical your applications are. The flip side of that is a team like myself, we're in DevOps, and we have tools to help developers, do their jobs easier. And sometimes those don't have crazy amounts of uptime. It's okay if it's down for a day or two. It's okay if we run into issues. So in that case, we might be optimizing more for cost and for our spend there, because we're not as crucial of an application. So it definitely depends on your use case, but top two for us, I think, would be security and performance, and probably reliability is really tied in with the performance piece as well.
All right, Paul, you want to take it?
Yeah, so far in my experience, it's all about trade-offs around time to market, right? Like you can handle security, but still got to get time to market. You can worry about cost, but it's still time to market. And so when looking at a well-architected lens for serverless frameworks, I don't know if anyone's really ever going to be able to start with it, right? Because you're just trying to get your product out to market, and once it's there and running, then you can kind of look back and use the framework how it's supposed to be used. And so really for me, a trade-off is, how much of these bullet points do I need to consider right now while I'm building my feature? Because pre-optimization is a problem all engineers run into, and for me it's like, can I just do everything with the tools that I know, the services that I already know, or am I going to take the time to learn the newest serverless service that may give me better time to market, but I still have to put that upfront time into learning it and architecting it? So that's the real trade-off.
Yeah, I think this is a great point, and this is something that often when you hear people's advice, you have to take in the context of who is giving the advice, where are they at in their career or a business in terms of years of expansion, et cetera. So I think, like Kristi is talking about, Liberty Mutual, gigantic company, they have to do that day one. They're established already. They have a customer base pre-existing, and then you might have maybe a startup, unproven product. Maybe that's where the time to market becomes the highest thing. You don't have as much, say PII data or financial data that you're dealing with right off the bat, and so it's a matter of how can you get this across as soon as possible, and that makes sense too. I know, Ro, I saw you did a LinkedIn post recently about a app that you were building. Obviously, you've been building that out. It's got a serverless architecture to it. You're trying to get that published as quick as possible. Did you follow like a similar line of thinking when you're building that, in terms of just trying to get it developed and get customer feedback as soon as possible? And I guess, like, now that you've gone through that process, are you now going to look back at the well architecture review process? And how do you think about that?
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, you want to put your idea out there, in terms of a business, and actually have it run in a cost-effective manner. So when I began the project, I just wanted to get it out there. So I didn't really think about any of the pillars or any serverless lens or anything. I just wanted to get it out there, and then now that it's out there, I go back to the back end, and look at the charts and everything, and then I try to see where I can now optimize, or where I can get something where I can develop it much better, and that's how I roll today.
Gotcha. Yeah, awesome. And then I know that one of the specific things that we talked about as our main topic too was best practices. And when we think about these different things, there's obviously, let's throw an example, production. We have to monitor things, alerting. I did see that in the serverless lens, there is a lot of that's there. How much of that, from y'all's experience, is directly applicable to people that may be using the framework, the well-architected framework with the serverless lens, to then add that into their project? And how much potentially is other stuff that you're having to add in? So for instance, let's say Lambda metrics. Are you looking at all the things that the well-architected framework is listing out, like the concurrency or Lambda errors? Or are you also looking at other stuff that's not listed in there? Of course, it's a very niche question, so if you do know what it says, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, it's hard to think about applying all of these metrics, using all of them all of the time. I think it gives a good overview of things to look at. We just recently did some performance benching for the project that I'm on. And, when you actually take the time to trace through all the calls that your service will make, you start to realize like, oh, okay, maybe I don't have to rely on, the throughput speed from S3, but it's more like, oh, I've got to call this third party like data store that my team has no control over, and it's going to take as long as it takes, right? And so now you're looking at your bottleneck in your architecture from like a different risk assessment. It's not so much the pieces that you already have, it's the pieces that you can't control. And that's where I think the lens really helps sort of separate those concerns, what you can and can't control.
Yeah, I have kind of a unique lens on this, being kind of in DevOps and helping folks. My job is to be a serverless expert of sorts. So, obviously my team is looking at these granular details, but we know, working with teams that are adopting serverless, they're not necessarily paying attention to those things, right? Like memory concurrency, like they're going to take the default out of the box and just run with it. Because that's just what's easiest. They don't have to think about it. They don't have to worry about it. So one of the things we're really working on is trying to highlight some of that stuff and show it in front of the developer to say like, hey, even though it's out of the box, where you're provisioning 3 gigs, you're only using 70 megs. Like you don't need that much. And you can save some cost, you can save some performance, you can save some time in some of these areas. So it's almost my job to pay attention to these niche things so that they don't really have to as other developers. And then there were some interesting points I thought in the lens too. There were a couple things not necessarily didn't agree with, but that are much harder translated into practice. One that stuck out to me was testing. I think the direction in here was, don't mock your services, try to use everything real and live. And I think anybody who's ever tested in a serverless environment, that is incredibly difficult, not easy to replicate locally. And in some cases with our access and security, that's not doable. So we have to use mocking of services and things. So I think that there are a lot of great things that are ideal in this, and we are doing most of those things, but some of those translated to a larger, corporation. Ryan, you mentioned this a little bit. We've been around for 110 years and we have a ton of developers and we're very well established and we're picking up legacy code and acquiring other companies and bringing in all these other pieces. So we're not always going to be able to fit this to a T, but we're trying to pay attention to as many controls and things as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great call out there. I opened up the testing section and when I read through that earlier, definitely unit integration testing is, but as you said, once you start getting into what do you mock locally or what do you have like a real connection to, it gets messy. I know that that's a constant thing that we're constantly dealing with as well. Is how far do you go into the replicating the cloud locally or trying to spin up environments? And as you said, it could be an access thing where it just completely limits your decision making and then you have to go with direct mocking. Question for Benoît. I know that on some of the stuff that you work on, there's definitely testing elements that are happening. What does that look like in your day-to-day serverless context?
Yeah, well, in our project, we use the honeycomb pattern. So we have a few unit tests with a few mocks. We do usually just look a given method was called from the AWS, maybe SDK with what input. And we try maybe not to mock outputs much because they are maybe unreliable. But then we have many integration tests that actually call real infrastructure in the cloud. So in two ways we do that. So one way is to actually call code locally. If you have a Lambda function, we would call the handler from jest maybe, and just would call real infrastructure like DynamoDB or even Bridge. And then we look how the code behaves and how it responds to some given inputs. But we also do sometimes some tests that to call the real Lambda. So we do use the SDK, call the Lambda in the cloud, also calling real infrastructure like DynamoDB, even Bridge, and look how it behaves, if some data was written correctly into DynamoDB, if an event was placed into the bus, and stuff like that. And maybe the reason to do that is to maybe test on IAM permissions, because we know that using code locally will usually work, because in your local you will have administrator access on development environments. But then when you deploy and you're running this in the cloud, suddenly you get an error and you have to go look to watch, and you realize that, yeah, you missed a permission. And finally, we have a very small number of integration tests, end-to-end tests, where we would call a given service, and we look at that the full workflow was fully executed properly. So it could be that you place an event to a bridge, which calls the Lambda function. That Lambda function will maybe put something into DynamoDB, which will in turn call DynamoDB stream, and again, put another event to a bridge. And we look that everything happened properly, and the end result is correct. So that's how we organize it in our team. It's been proven to work, except from the usual problems that we face with some tests sometimes failing when they actually didn't, because it's a bit hard to test properly with we sometimes have some undeterministic tests. They fail when they shouldn't, and sometimes just result works. So we are also working on that to fix them as we find them. Sometimes it's just like maybe even bridge. The event was placed in bridge, but it was delayed for some reason, and we didn't see it. So these are the kind of issues we face with testing in the cloud.
Yeah, awesome. And I think this is such a good line of topics that we can now flow through. I was remembering when you were talking, Kristi, about some of the work that your team is doing, and I remember also from the podcast episode. So we got this well architected framework. It's in a PDF form. That's great. Read it, absorb it, try to put it into practice. But as you said, y'all teams are scaling out. I know on our end, our teams are scaling out. How do we enable all these developers to build things in a well-architected way in maybe a more automated fashion? I believe that you've thought about this and potentially are trying to put some stuff together on that, if that's correct.
Yeah, so this is something that my team is really focused on right now, and we're really excited about, because it is true. You know, I've sat in on a couple well-architected reviews right now, and they're being forced down through kind of our objectives for developers, which is awesome. However, that tooling to help folks out, that subject matter expertise, is not completely there yet. It's still relatively new. And, you know, with such a large company, we're not all completely cloud and serverless just yet. So for those that are and are starting to go through this well-architected process, I've sat in on reviews where pillars take a couple hours. And that's mostly because data is just not readily available for folks. You know, you have to check all your accounts, all your environments, all your regions separately. You're kind of jumping around. It's like, hey, I actually forgot, I coded this a month ago. I don't remember how I set this up. I don't remember how I configured these resources. I need to go back and cross-check the code. What do we have deployed right now? It was a lot of that kind of conversation. So I think we have to be careful with completely automating the process, because there is value coming out of these discussions. And I think that it really does force individuals and teams to go back through and really think through their cloud best practices and their understanding of serverless and how they're putting things together. And there's certain pillars you really can't automate, like operational excellence. All of those questions are directly tied to how your team operates, how you choose to work through things. There's no way I'm going to be able to automate something like that. But what we're looking at is really pulling that configuration data into one centralized location for teams, so that they can go through and say like, oh, hey, yep, this is exactly how I configured these things. We're looking, for example, at like memory right now. So I brought that up earlier with consume memory. We're flagging that and saying, hey, our recommendation is to run the Lambda power tuner against your function, because it looks like you might be over provisioned with memory. And that directly relates to this cost question in the well-architected cost pillar, and it relates to this performance question. So you can use these data points to fill out those questions when you're going through a well-architected review. And again, the point isn't to completely automate the process, it's to help developers make conscious choices and to understand what they're doing, and to speed up that, instead of 6 hours to do a pillar review, it only takes an hour. So that's kind of what we're trying to do in the sweet spot that we're working in. And obviously, well-architected and serverless are not completely exclusive. So we're focusing on serverless resources because that tends to be where the bulk of our work is right now. It could even expand into other services and things, but we're hoping by providing this for serverless, it forces more people into serverless technologies too.
Awesome. Yeah, and I had another question, which is maybe Paul, you could try to take this one. If I'm a company, I'm evaluating. We've got a ton of apps. I'm going to evaluate it through this serverless lens. How do I start? What do I do? Do I open up the document and get into a meeting? I know Kristi was touching on this as well, so I'm sure you can jump in after Paul. So like, do I open it up? Do I get into a meeting? Do I go one by one? Do I try to do it all at once? Do I have one person do it and then present that, or have the entire team engaged? Like, what do you think is the most able to be processed, I guess, of going through this thing?
Yeah, so I've only gone through the full well-architected audit like once or twice with a customer, and those always go best when you're able to first get the right people, in the room. Like that's number one, the hardest for any kind of audit review, right? You want the technical folks as well as the business folks there to start on the organizational side. It's probably the messiest, but that's where the most efficiencies can actually come out, is through that organizational pillar. People really are able, like they'll just keep bolting on services and spinning up new things, and like we just make new things all the time. Just keep making them, but they haven't taken the time to really look at, from a full top-down picture, like what does this organization really look like and how we categorize our technology usage. Are we really doing, the things that we need to, and segmenting groups that need control, and how they control and how they self-govern, and all of those pieces, I think, are the hardest, but also the most fruitful to work through for an organization and for a company, because you're going to start getting immediate feedback, because you'll know where the friction is, right? You'll mention a service, and then you're like, oh no, it's that team service. Like we can't do this and that and the other, or oh yeah, that's going to be easy. I'll just ping an email and we'll fix this right up. Compared to the more like nitty gritty stuff of like performance overhauls and metrics, you can really get lost in the weeds there and like not really come out with anything. Like you'll know how fast your Lambdas run, but without the business context, you're not sure if that's good, right? So I really like, I would suggest the hard stuff up front, the boring, difficult stuff, which is organization.
I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I can hop in here and give a perspective, kind of what we're doing. And I'd say there's kind of two ways that this comes about. I did mention that we're kind of having our developers all go through a well-architected review this year if they're in cloud. And there's kind of two different ways that that's happening. It's either that folks on the teams know that they have to go through it. So they reach out to their architects, they kind of reach out for resources, and they sit down and start having those discussions. Or it's more of a top-down approach where an architect over a group of teams will say, hey, I know all of you guys need to go through a well-architected review, so let's start setting those up. The ones that I've sat in on is typically pillar by pillar. It tends to be like start with an hour or two discussion. And then, if we need more time, we'll set up more time later this week or next week. So it's not like a whole day, really intensive thing, because again, these are really heavy conversations. There's a lot of stuff to think through, and cognitively it's a lot. So they tend to split these up over a couple days. Sometimes it's taking a couple weeks just to have, maybe an hour meeting every morning to go through each pillar or to go through a series of pillars. And just taking questions one by one, having really open team discussions, asking a lot of questions, tends to be the way that folks are approaching this right now from what I have seen. Again, we're still fairly new to this and trying to figure out what the best processes look like. And ideally, in our minds, we would like this to be something that teams revisit continuously. So it's not just a one and done thing. You're obviously always building out new features or maintaining or going forward. So, whether it's up to the teams to decide they're reviewing it quarterly, maybe twice a year, maybe monthly if it's that crazy. So, we want to promote that as well. And, I'd say most everyone's in the room. We're going to go through each pillar one by one and ask those questions. So that's kind of where we're at right now. It might evolve. It might kind of grow. We'll see how long it takes folks to get through some of these discussions and through some of these conversations. But yeah, it's really just sitting down with that PDF, starting a well-architected review in the AWS portal. And we're letting teams define, what that workload is right now. So if they want to go repo by repo, that makes the most sense for what they're doing. Maybe they have 3 or 4 that contribute to a workload or to an application, and they can sit down, and it's easier to think of things in terms of your full app end to end. We're allowing for that too. So it kind of depends on what teams are owning, how much, if it's networking, if it's data, if it's more compute heavy. Kind of depends, and up to them if they want to separate those out into layers and review those layers, or kind of all at once. So we're still learning here, but I think that we're off to a good start. We've got some positive feedback so far and some stuff to run with.
Awesome. And yeah, I wanted to open up to Benoît and Ro as well. What would you, from your perspective and how you consume information, being in lots of different meetings with people, is there a certain flow that you would potentially take with going through an app and kind of leading that review process? And what are y'all's thoughts?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Reviewing this, it can be hard as well. As I mentioned earlier, maybe doing one pillar and maybe trying to improve it could also affect another one. So I think you need to keep that in mind as well. And yeah, I think that's something we usually try to keep in mind as we evolve in the project. So in mind all the pillars as we make new things as the project evolves, to maybe keep it as efficient as possible with cost, with performance, with everything. And yeah, I think that's something we've not done yet, like a review process of all the pillars and see if we still hold to them. That's something we maybe should do very, very soon. And I'm not sure yet how we would do it, but I guess we would do it pillar per pillar maybe, or at least go one by one and look how we perform and how we do for each one and what needs to be improved, and then we prioritize one or another depending on what is the goal of that we want to achieve.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
Right. So yeah, actually, I haven't gone through any review process yet. But on a personal project I've been working on, because I really want to dive deep into it, but it's just something. It's sort of a wrapper around mobile money APIs, around APIs. So we actually, when I say we, just the two of us actually just looked at the first the first pillar, which was security, because even though it was just a wrapper API on the real API, you still had to think about how the user's data would be securely stored on our data store of choice. So we did it pre-development, but not post-development, as maybe the question demands. So that's just about it.
Okay. And yeah, I think on this similar topic, as we started hinting at, like, hey, I'm like potentially trying to understand some complex information. What's the best way to do that? Obviously, no, serverless can be complex when learning it from day one. And so I know that our third topic of the day was serverless education and how to jumpstart your career. So in that same way, what do y'all think is the path forward? If you're starting July 26, 2022, what would you do if you're trying to pick up serverless and learn it?
Okay, I'll go first here. So the first thing is, I mean, I don't know how this might sound, but the first thing is don't go to Twitter for resources. Everybody will tell you to go for certifications. I mean, I'm so happy I didn't, back in 2020, back in late 2020, I didn't actually go to Twitter and was like, okay, I want to learn, serverless, please, can I get links? I would have been chasing a bunch of certifications now, which I really don't think it's the right path. I mean, it's great, but personally, I don't think it's the right path. I think there's first the AWS workshops link, where it has a ton of great articles written by really, really brilliant Amazon engineers. And then the actually YouTubers, maybe somebody like Marcia, there's, I mean, over my blog actually teaches serverless. I've just taken this opportunity to plug my own stuff. So it actually teaches serverless from a real life point of view, from basic, like building it both front end and back end. So I think, yeah, that's it for me.
I'd say, don't make things harder on yourself and start with what's out there. Great place to start is some of the IAC tools like CDK and SAM, because they're going to kind of jumpstart you and have everything out of the box. You hit a little bit, Ro, on like the workshops, like the CDK workshop is awesome. Using SAM and Init out of the box to get just the hello world stood up. And then again, you can even read the well-architected serverless application lens, because it's going to give you those examples, of different, if you're building an Alexa skill, or if you're trying to do something mobile, or if you have a web application, it'll kind of walk you through the key services and how to make those choices and trade-offs. And then combined with a tool like SAM or CDK, you're going to be off and running pretty quickly and easily.
Yeah, what I would say is, if you're starting, if you're new to serverless, I would say get involved with the community. The serverless community is very, very small, and I learned so much more from the community and talking to people and exchanging ideas than I could learn from books or from anything. Of course, resources are still very important, like read some blogs from experts, from people that know. That's also very important. I would also, with Rose saying that certs, they don't really maybe anything, except that you just have that badge you can put on LinkedIn or something. But apart from that, yeah, I guess get your hands on it as well. Serverless is taught by getting your hands dirty, try stuff. Also, serverless is cheap, so don't hesitate to create an account, spin up some resources, see how they work, experiment, and that's really how you will learn a lot.
I also got to give a shout out for the workshop. That's kind of like my secret for learning AWS services really fast. You type in the name of the service and then workshop immersion day into Google, and you'll get all of the awesome workshops that AWS will do for their their companies and their customers. They just put on all these immersion days, and you're able to follow through step by step what the patterns sort of look like. For folks that are brand new to serverless, I have to qualify it with they're probably also brand new to AWS. And that can be really, really daunting to take on compared to other, self-hosted solutions that developers might be used to, and other platforms, as a service. And to get started, it really is about taking whatever it is that you already know and just porting it, to AWS and seeing what is available as an analog for your current stack. And then you'll just start seeing like, oh, I don't need this anymore. It's replaced by this. Like, I don't need these 5 pieces anymore. It's replaced just by this. And then you'll be able to see the patterns and recognize where the services fit organically with the workload that you're creating. If you're just doing it to learn, there's tons of tutorials about all kinds of stuff now for serverless. It's kind of wild, it's been out now for many years. And I always have to, think about, like, when I first got started, I actually didn't know how to set up any infrastructure because I'd already been doing infrastructure as code as part of my project process. So now when I come across other web frameworks, I have to learn how networking works again. I have to learn all these load balancing things that I never did before. And so if someone were brand new to it and they didn't already have that knowledge about sort of the infrastructure parts, you can kind of get started there. Take your monolith app and learn how to launch it, and then you'll realize that's a lot of work. Or I could just not use the web framework, break up my routes into single responsibility lambdas, use a single API gateway, and you're off to the races. And then you just sit back and go, oh, okay, this is cool. I'm into this. And you really start to feel like you can own the process.
Yeah, I love all these answers. And one thing that you just brought up at the very end of that, Paul, was personally, I was, they say born in the cloud. I was so if you started between maybe 2006 and now, maybe you're born in the cloud. If you were, of course, learning cloud from the start, I learned serverless from the start. I mean, I did very basic. I don't even think I hosted a website in a non-serverless way before I learned how to do it in a serverless way. So that was early 2017. And then I actually went from doing serverless at Nike to then going to a healthcare company and then being on a technical operations team, sunsetting EC2 servers. So I had to learn all the inverse of that, the flip side of what you were just saying as well. And it's definitely, you can take for granted how much is being done in the background. But that's also the beautiful part of serverless. So that's great. I also wanted to touch on the certification thing. It's an interesting thing, and I think what I've seen from you, Rose, has been awesome to see over time is just a number of project-based stuff that you do, and reading through a series of articles that you've done in the past about how to build some full end-to-end piece of technology is really easy to almost it's more immersive, so I find myself, I'm reading it, I'm seeing the full end-to-end steps, and then when I come out of it, I almost have a portfolio piece, and I think that's super awesome. I also wanted to shout out that the Serverless Guru team, we went to Serverless Days NYC, and there was 35 people there, and so I got a lot of one-on-one time with Jeremy Daly and James Beswick and people like that, because there wasn't very many people there, and it was a free conference. So I would definitely keep those in mind, because talking directly to someone like Jeremy Daly, or pretty much anybody that's at one of those conferences this early on, because it is so new, as I believe Benoît was saying, you can end up learning a whole bunch. One thing that Jeremy Daly spoke about, I think both formally and informally, was that the cost of Lambda, they could potentially give discounts on that And who knows? I have no private information. I'm not sharing anything. If that's basically the idea being that it is kind of fixed, so you pay a per million invocation cost, but over time they could actually say, oh, you're doing 1 billion requests. Well, here's a discount on that, and it's something that very easy they could do in the background, save customers money, and definitely would make AWS continue to be competitive into the far future. As other additional clouds and platforms are popping up that are now doing similar things to what Lambda does. So I don't know, just a random sprinkle in of stuff there. Yes, so we have some audience questions. So let me pop those up. The first one that we had come in was from Easy Cloud Computing, and he said, or she said, hi, can you guys shed light on microservices? So who wants to take this? What is a microservice? What is it? Are we nanoservices? Are we microservices? Or is it a monolith? Like, what do these words mean? And can you help share your insight to our wonderful audience?
Asking the hard questions. How to define a microservice. It keeps changing for me, every time I think of a microservice. But I think it's in the serverless context. It's a grouped set of resources that sort of supply one type of information when you're calling it. So the forever classic example is you have a payment service and an order service. Well, in your software, there's going to be separate divisions of knowledge and workflow to do a certain thing, and then you try to encapsulate all that into a set of event bridge events that trigger functions or orchestrations from step functions or lambdas, or just do stuff with the database. But it's per knowledge bit that's in your business logic. That's how I think of microservices versus a full monolith where your entire compute process will hang or just not run if one call doesn't go well.
Yeah, I'd say, microservices are a little bit more modular. So it is easier to go in there and change and update and break pieces off more logically and kind of work with them. In terms of microservices with serverless, they do very much lend itself to being hand in hand, because best practices for things like Lambda functions are to have very small logical pieces broken out into Lambda functions. I did actually have to laugh a little bit because there was a piece in the serverless framework that was talking, or in the serverless well-architected lens, that was talking about how you could put a monolith application and a Lambda function, but you don't want to do that. It's not smart practice. You're going to cost a lot of money. Not going to make sense. We're not going to tell you no, but we're going to highly recommend against that. And actually, one thing that I did like about this recent refresh from a couple weeks ago is that they do go through a whole bunch of different scenarios right in the beginning of the paper. And the very first one is actually on RESTful microservices. And they show you a great example of using a Lambda function API gateway and a DynamoDB table, and kind of explain that workflow a little bit more and when it might be best for your services. So if that's something you're interested in, I would highly recommend kind of starting there.
Yeah, for me, it's a bit hard to see or to determine how far we have to go with microservices. Like, if we want to think purely for microservices, ideally it should be a service with its own resources, its own database, and nothing is shared at all with other services. And in the end, they communicate with each other through different communication channels. But in practice, I've found this to be a bit hard sometimes to follow. And in the end, we will end up with maybe what we call a distributed monolith, where we have small pieces of architecture Lambda functions, SQL queues, DynamoDB tables. All are small pieces of architecture that they still communicate to each other, but they are still very tied together. Like if you remove one, maybe part of your application will still work, but some other will not. So yeah, it's hard to see and to enforce really pure microservices sometimes.
In theory, actually, microservices, I mean, it sounds nice when your application is small. I mean, it still sounds nice, build an application, separate it into logical components and actually decouple them from each other using, SQS and stuff like that, event bridge. It really sounds nice when the application is small, but as it gets bigger, you start seeing some complexity. If you don't really know the concepts properly, you definitely build up a distributed monolith. But I think AWS has released a white paper on microservices, implementing microservices in the cloud. So I think I've actually read through it once, but have not really gotten a hold of the concept like solidly. But I think that should be a great starting point for anybody who wants to dive deep into microservices with AWS services, and then they pick it from there.
Awesome. And coming to our second question. So thank you for bearing with us as we just crossed over the 1 hour mark. Yeah, celebration. So are there any key things to identify before starting a well-architected review? So we touched on this a little bit earlier. So if anybody has some extra little things that this question triggers, what are key things to look at before starting?
I think, like I said, a lot of our pain points are with not having the data readily accessible or available. So just making sure you have like all of your resource configurations up, all of your code kind of up and ready. And also, one of the ones that helps a lot with like operational excellence is looking through your team norms and any sort of like agile documents. If you're like an agile team, those kinds of things are really good to have handy. And it does help to go through the questions and just almost read them before even jumping into the review or before you have that sit down meeting with your team and formally start the review process so that you can get started thinking about some of those things, because they can be tough questions or a little confusing if you haven't seen them before or don't really know how to approach them. So I think kind of just giving them a read through and having all of your resources and things for everything you want to review readily available. Don't just think top of mind you'll remember everything, because the chances are you probably will not.
And then does anybody else have an idea here around if you were going to basically do a well-architected review, what key things to have before starting?
No, I think Kristi really nailed it. Just having a little bit of research done ahead of time, having your docs handy and ready. Forcing people to go through docs is always a good exercise when you have the luxury.
Awesome. Okay. Something that I might add to it is that it definitely, having the resources ready and probably having the right people in the room, which was mentioned earlier, because I can imagine a scenario where, if you didn't have that exact makeup of people that are required to actually review it properly, then there might be a lot of like, oh, wait, who is working on that? Like maybe do some baseline of like these things, like Kristi was saying, these things are going to be reviewed. Who is the direct contact, like point of contact for each one of those? And making sure that you either have all the information required to review it or they're actually in a room with you. Because I can imagine how many meetings probably have to get re-pushed by not having that exact setup ready to go. And potentially recording it, right? Like I think people don't record as many meetings as they should. Something like that, record it, then other people can use it. And then it almost could be a training tool for additional apps if you wanted to enable teams as they're scaling out to be able to work independently. Get your best people in the room, tackle something that is a review process, record it, film it, whatever makes sense, get all the questions that people are asking and how they're thinking about it, and then use that as training material for other teams that are going through that same process to enable them there. All right, and our final question of the panel this month is, actually, it's not a good question, it's more of a comment, so it's a celebratory thing. We converted our SaaS solution to serverless, saved us and our customers lots of time, money, and headaches. So if you're looking for some reassurance about tackling serverless, jumping into this, definitely look at Thunder Technologies here. It's a glowing review about what is possible. I know all of us work in the space. We all believe that serverless is the current place that we're in. It's the latest abstraction layer of building applications that are modern and quick and have the least amount of operational overhead and maintenance and so on and so on. But as things keep going, we always need reassurance that we're on the right path. And so I think if you're listening to this and you're just getting started, serverless, there's a huge market in terms of job skill that's still not being filled. You know, Serverless Guru, we are a consulting company that does provide serverless consultants, but the market is so huge for companies that need that. And so if you're independent, if you want to do your own freelance, if you want to do work at a company like Liberty Mutual that's doing awesome serverless stuff, there's a huge need for that information. And there's lots of different ways to go about it. You heard from our panel about how you can potentially start. I got my start building an Alexa skill. So, you know, shout out if you go that path. I loved hearing a robot talk back to me. So that was super cool. That was like the highlight of I built a Lambda function. I had the Alexa SDK. It was super basic. It didn't store any state in DynamoDB or anything complex like that the serverless lens might mention. But it did work and it did say at least something to me. And that kind of sparked a whole bunch of excitement for the rest of my career. So, all right, final thoughts as we're coming to a close here. Let's maybe go round robin. I'll give everybody a chance to speak, shout things out that you have going. Let's kick it off with Kristi first.
Sure, yeah. As Ryan mentioned, we're always hiring, so definitely reach out if you're interested in a career at Liberty Mutual. More remote friendly as well, which is nice. I'll do a shameless plug. The Serverless Denver chapter has a meetup every month, and our next one is on Thursday. So if you're in the area, come by and listen to Matthew Bonig speak about CDK and serverless and IAC tools. As far as other things I have coming up, this might be it for a little while. I think I have a nice little summer break, but I will be attending the AWS Summit in Chicago at the end of August. I will be speaking about serverless there if anybody is attending. And I also have booked my tickets for AWS reInvent. So some cool events coming up. Definitely feel free to check it out. Follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn. I tend to post whatever I have going on there, and I'll share more about serverless Colorado things. And otherwise, definitely highly recommend checking out the new refreshed, well-architected serverless lens. Let me know what you think.
Awesome. Let's go Paul Benoît. Any final thoughts as we're coming to a close here?
Yeah, just wanted to say that you know, the serverless lens here, this focuses on how to use AWS services, but beyond AWS, I apply this like serverless lens to everything in technology. I've started to do a little bit of machine learning, and it's much easier to pay Google for their Colab environment than trying to figure out how to get my beefy GPU to run Python and its virtual, all this stuff. Like, I tried for way too long, and then I was like, oh, Google Colab. Like, I just hit a button and it spun up an environment for me. Like, there is a server. I pay for a server to run code, but in my opinion, like, it's basically serverless because I didn't have to install anything or do anything. You know, it ran the little Python notebook. And so serverless is way more than just, you know, what we've talked about here on AWS. And for folks listening, there's tons of ways to really leverage cloud infrastructure in general. And just a quick shout out, Paul Chin Jr. on Twitter. And that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I don't really have anything else to add apart from what's being said. Just thank you for being here today, and yeah, follow me on Twitter, and see you next time.
But I think someone like me, I like getting my hands dirty. So actually, whatever I've been said is that's the best time to put it in practice. So if you're out there and you love digging into, or you want to start up in serverless, or you love digging into serverless, I have a blog. It's called fatrabbitsapps.com. You can check it out. And then some Saturdays I actually go into a system design with serverless. I'm not a pro. I'm still trying to learn. So it'd really be great if you can join. And let's learn together. Thank you.
Awesome. Always love Rose humility as well. With that, we are at close. This was the July serverless panel. We did it. It's done. If you found this useful, you want to learn more about any one of our great panelists, you can check out their @symbols here, all links to their Twitter. Otherwise, we'll be posting the recording of this onto our YouTube channel, so definitely subscribe over there. If there's any questions that you still have, shoot those out to the individual people on Twitter directly. And with that, this is our serverless panel July to a close. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our wonderful panelists, and we'll see you next time.